National Chief, thanks so much for taking some time for us. What good came out of 2018 for First Nations people?
Well, good question. When you think back to 2018 and what happened for First Nations people in a positive way, I think back to a number of things. First thing is the amount of investment in First Nations issues. $17 billion over 7 fiscal years, for education and housing and infrastructure and water. That's an unprecedented amount. So we've got to make sure that those resources get out to the communities and that they have a real meaningful impact on the ground. So that's one of the big things. I also think about NAFTA, pushing for an Indigenous peoples chapter throughout NAFTA. And now there is a Canada-USA-Mexico agreement, and by far, when you look at it, it's the most progressive as it relates to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples' rights. That's another big thing. Another big thing is getting government convinced that they've got to co-develop legislation with us as First Nations peoples. So we're beginning the process on Indigenous Languages Act. We're beginning the process on the child welfare piece of legislation. So those are positive developments. But we've got to keep building and doing more because there's still a huge socioeconomic gap that exists. And we have to close that, because once that gap closes, it's not only good for First Nations people, it's good for Canada as a whole. So we have lots of work to do.
National Chief, would you say there were some step backs from reconciliation in 2018?
Well, when you think of it across Canada, there's a few setbacks we wish we could have moved on a lot quicker. When I think about the justice system and starting to move towards restorative justice versus punitive justice, I think about the issues with policing in Quebec, the Sûreté de Québec. I think about the issue of policing in Thunder Bay. I think about all those things, and I think we have to really collaboratively and collectively work together to start working towards a First Nations justice system. And we need more First Nations police officers, First Nations court workers, First Nations juries and judges, and all the above. It's about a whole justice system that needs to be revamped. And that's what we got to put our energies going forward. And I think we can do that.
You've spoken about having 3 priorities ahead of the October 2019 federal election. What work do you need to get done?
Oh, there's a lot of work. We got to make sure that all of our priorities get into every major party platform, from the Liberals to the Conservatives to the NDP to the Greens. We have to advocate so that we see ourselves and our priorities and our issues reflected in their party platforms. As First Nations people, we've said we need a new fiscal relationship with the Crown, one that's based on total membership, on and off our communities, one that keeps up with inflation, one that's treaty-based, and even a percentage of GDP from the land and resource wealth, which we're sharing. That's a new fiscal relationship with the Crown we need. We need to work towards treaty implementation. We have a treaty with the Crown, and treaty will always trump policy. And so no matter who gets in, our relationships with the Crown and the honor of the Crown must be respected. We've got to fix 4 outdated policies: comprehensive claims, specific claims, additions to reserve, the inherent right to self-government are all currently based on termination of rights and title, not recognition of rights and title. So we've got to work on those pieces. So there's a lot of work going forward. And I think we can get this done. And if we get this done in a good way, you're going to have a better country for everybody.
Well, it should be an interesting year. National Chief, I appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thanks for the opportunity.